I walked in on my husband with another woman in our own bed, and he told me it was a mistake. Now he's trying to save our marriage, but I can't get over it. I never thought this would be my reality. Walking into our bedroom, the place that was supposed to be my safe space, only to find my husband tangled up with another woman. I'm 33, and my husband Derek is 35. We've been married for 8 years, and I always thought we had a good marriage. Sure, we had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? Nothing could have prepared me for the sight I saw when I walked into our bedroom that day. It's an image I can't erase from my mind, no matter how much I try. It was a regular Tuesday afternoon. I had come home early from work, excited to surprise Derek. We hadn't spent much time together lately, and I thought it would be nice to have a spontaneous date night. But when I walked into our house, something felt off. The air was too still, too quiet. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured Derek was just working in his home office, like he usually did when he worked from home. But as I walked up the stairs, I heard noises that didn't make sense. Laughter. A woman's voice. My heart sank, but I still didn't want to believe the worst. I stood outside our bedroom door for a moment, trying to tell myself that I was imagining things. But when I opened the door, the scene in front of me shattered any illusion I had left. There they were, Derek and some woman I didn't recognize in our bed. Our bed. My whole body went numb. I couldn't even process what I was seeing at first. It was like my brain just shut down. I wanted to scream, to cry, but I was frozen in place, unable to do anything but stare. Derek was the first to notice me standing there. He jumped up, scrambling to cover himself, while the woman grabbed her clothes and bolted out of the room without even looking at me. I was still in shock, unable to say a word. Derek started babbling, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that it was a mistake, that he didn't mean for it to happen. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Didn't mean for it to happen. How could you accidentally end up in bed with another woman? My brain couldn't even process the absurdity of it all. I finally found my voice. What the hell is going on? I demanded, my voice shaking with rage and hurt. Derek kept trying to explain, saying it was a one-time thing, that he was stressed and vulnerable, and that it didn't mean anything. But I wasn't buying it. How could something like this not mean anything? He had betrayed me, violated our marriage, and now he was standing there, half naked, trying to convince me it was just a mistake. I could feel my blood boiling, but at the same time, I felt like I was going to be sick. I stormed out of the bedroom, not even sure where I was going. I just needed to get out of there. I could hear Derek calling after me, begging me to stay to talk, but I couldn't. I grabbed my car keys and left, not caring where I'd ended up. I drove around aimlessly for hours, my mind racing with a million different thoughts. How long had this been going on? Who was that woman? How could Derek do this to me? I felt like I was in a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. Eventually, I pulled into the parking lot of a random park and just sat there, staring out the windshield. My phone buzzed with messages from Derek, but I didn't read them. I couldn't deal with him right now. I couldn't deal with any of it. I felt like my whole life had just crumbled before my eyes. The man I had built a life with, the man I trusted more than anyone, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. And now I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to move forward. That night, I stayed at a friend's house. I didn't tell her everything at first, just that Derek and I had a huge fight and I needed some space. She didn't press for details. Thank God, but I knew I couldn't avoid the truth for long. Eventually, I'd have to face what happened. Eventually, I'd have to make a decision. But for that night, I just needed to breathe, to be away from the house, away from Derek, away from everything that reminded me of what I had just witnessed. The next morning, Derek called me again. This time, I answered. I didn't say much, just listened as he apologized over and over again, saying he was sorry, that it would never happen again, that he loved me and didn't want to lose me. But his words felt hollow. I had heard those same words before, just not in this context. I had heard him say he was sorry after our small fights, after he forgot something important. But this was different. This wasn't something a simple apology could fix. I asked him how long it had been going on. He swore it was just that one time, that he hadn't been seeing her behind my back for months or anything like that. But I didn't believe him. How could I? He'd already lied to me by cheating. What was stopping him from lying about how long it had been happening? The trust was gone, shattered into a million pieces, and I didn't know if it could ever be rebuilt. I felt like I didn't even know who he was anymore. Over the next few days, Derek tried everything to get me to come back home. He sent flowers, left me voice messages, wrote me long, heartfelt texts, but none of it made a difference. I wasn't ready to face him, wasn't ready to go back to the house where I had seen him with another woman. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. I stayed with my friend, trying to sort through my emotions, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Part of me wanted to confront him, to make him explain everything, but another part of me just wanted to forget it ever happened. Eventually, after a few days of silence, I agreed to meet with Derek. We met at a coffee shop, neutral ground, so I wouldn't have to go back to the house. When I walked in and saw him sitting there, looking disheveled and anxious, I felt a wave of anger wash over me. He looked like a mess, but I didn't care. He was the one who had caused this mess, not me. He didn't get to play the victim here. He didn't get to act like he was the one suffering. We sat down, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, Derek spoke. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you, and I want to fix this. I want to make things right." I just stared at him, not sure what to say. How do you make things right after something like this? How do you fix a marriage that's been broken in such a fundamental way? I didn't have an answer, and I wasn't sure Derek did either. We talked for a while, but it felt like we were just going in circles. Derek kept saying he wanted to save our marriage, that he would do whatever it took to make things right. But I didn't know if that was even possible. Every time I looked at him, all I could see was the image of him in bed with another woman. It was burned into my brain, and I couldn't shake it. I didn't know if I ever would. How do you come back from something like that? Derek suggested we go to marriage counseling, and I agreed, though I wasn't sure it would help. I didn't want to give up on our marriage, not after 8 years, but I also didn't know if it could be saved. We started seeing the counselor once a week, and at first, it seemed like we were making progress. Derek was open and vulnerable, admitting his mistakes and talking about how much he regretted what he had done. But no matter how much he apologized, no matter how many times he said he loved me, I couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same. The counseling sessions brought up a lot of unresolved issues in our marriage, things that had been bubbling under the surface for years but had never been addressed. Derek talked about feeling neglected, about how he thought I wasn't as invested in our relationship as I used to be. I talked about how distant he had become over the past few months, how I felt like I was always walking on eggshells around him, trying not to upset him. We both had our grievances, but none of that justified what he had done. As the weeks went on, I started to feel like Derek was more invested in saving our marriage than I was. He was doing everything the counselor suggested, attending sessions, reading relationship books, making an effort to be more attentive. But I felt numb. I wanted to care, wanted to be as committed to fixing things as he was, but I couldn't. The betrayal was still too fresh, too painful. Every time I thought about what he had done, it felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I confided in my friends about what had happened, and they were shocked. Most of them couldn't believe that Derek had cheated. He always seemed like the perfect husband. They all had their opinions about what I should do. Some told me to leave him, to start over and find someone who would never betray me like that. Others said I should give him a second chance, that people make mistakes and that if Derek was truly sorry, we could work through it. But I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know if I had it in me to forgive him. I started to notice little things that made me doubt Derek's sincerity. He was doing everything right on the surface, being attentive, sending sweet texts, making an effort to rebuild our connection. But there were moments when it felt forced, like he was doing it because he knew he had to, not because he genuinely wanted to. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still hiding something. Once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. The turning point came one night when Derek and I were having dinner at home. We were talking about our plans for the weekend, trying to keep things light, when out of nowhere, I broke down. I started crying, unable to hold it in any longer. "I can't do this," I sobbed. "I can't pretend like everything is fine. I can't get over what you did." Derek looked devastated. "I don't expect you to get over it," he said softly. but I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. But that was the problem. I didn't know if I wanted him to try anymore. I started thinking about how my life would look without Derek. We'd been together for so long that the thought of being on my own terrified me. But was staying in a marriage where I couldn't trust him any better? Was it worth the pain, the constant second-guessing, the doubt? I didn't know. I had spent so many years building a life with him, and now it felt like that life was slipping away, piece by piece. I didn't want to lose him, but I didn't know if I could ever forgive him either. Derek continued to push for counseling, for more talks, for anything that would help us get back on track. But I wasn't sure I wanted to be on that track anymore. Every time I thought about our future, all I could see was that woman in our bed, and it broke my heart all over again. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if he was going to hurt me again, if he was really being honest, or if I was just fooling myself into believing things could ever be the same. I tried talking to my mom about it. She's always been the voice of reason in my life, the person I turn to when I need advice. But even she didn't know what to say. She was shocked when I told her what happened, and at first, she was furious with Derek. But as the days went on, she softened a little. People make mistakes, she said one night on the phone. If he's truly sorry and willing to make things right, maybe it's worth giving him a second chance. But the idea of giving him another chance made my stomach turn. Could I really do that? Could I really just forgive him? Pretend like nothing happened? Every time I thought about it, I felt like I was betraying myself, betraying everything I stood for. But at the same time, I couldn't deny that I still loved him. I still wanted him, even after everything he had done. My heart and my head were in a constant battle, and I didn't know which side was going to win. Some days, I thought I could forgive him, but other days I felt like I'd rather walk away and never look back. I started avoiding Derek. I didn't want to go back to the house, didn't want to see him, didn't want to have another conversation about fixing things. I stayed with my friend for weeks, hoping that the distance would give me some clarity. But the longer I stayed away, the more confused I became. I thought that time apart would help me see things clearly, but instead, it only made me more conflicted. I missed Derek, but I hated him at the same time. It was like I was stuck in a loop, unable to move forward or backward. One night, after too many glasses of wine, I texted Derek. I didn't even know what I wanted to say, just that I needed to get something off my chest. "I can't forgive you," I wrote, my fingers trembling as I typed. "I want to, but I can't. I don't know if I'll ever be able to." It was the first time I had been completely honest with him since everything had happened. I didn't expect a response, but a few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "I understand," Derek replied, "but I'm not giving up on us." His response made me cry, but not for the reasons I expected. It wasn't sadness or anger or even regret. It was relief. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't the only one holding on to hope for our marriage. Derek was too. And even though I didn't know if things would ever be the same, I realized that maybe that was okay. Maybe we didn't need to go back to the way things were. Maybe we needed to build something new, something stronger. But even as I started to let go of some of the anger, I couldn't shake the fear. What if it happened again? What if, months or years down the line, Derek found himself in another situation like this? How could I ever fully trust him again? I didn't want to live my life constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if he was being faithful. That kind of paranoia would destroy me, and I knew it. But the thought of losing him completely was just as terrifying. We continued going to counseling, but I was still struggling. Derek was doing everything right, saying all the things I wanted to hear, but the doubt lingered. I started having nightmares about that day, walking in on him with that woman. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, feeling like I was back in that moment all over again. It was like my mind was torturing me, refusing to let me forget what had happened. I felt trapped, unable to escape the memories, no matter how hard I tried. One night, I woke up from another nightmare, and I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep living in this state of constant fear and uncertainty. I needed to make a decision, one way or another. Either I was going to forgive Derek and move forward, or I was going to walk away and start over. But I couldn't keep living in this limbo. It was destroying me, and it wasn't fair to either of us. I lay there in the dark, thinking about everything we had been through, and I knew what I had to do. The next day, I called Derek and asked him to meet me for lunch. We sat down at a small cafe, the same place we had gone on one of our first dates. It felt surreal, like we'd come full circle. "I've been thinking a lot," I said, my voice shaky. "And I've made a decision." Derek looked nervous, like he was bracing for the worst. "I can't keep living like this," I continued. "I can't keep questioning everything, wondering if I'll ever be able to trust you again." He nodded, not saying anything. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully forgive you," I admitted. "But I love you, and I want to try. I want to see if we can rebuild something from this, something better than before. But I need time. I need space. And I need you to be patient with me." Derek looked like he was about to cry. "I'll give you as much time as you need," he said softly. "I'll do whatever it takes. I love you, and I'm not giving up on us." His words were sincere, but I still felt a knot of fear in my stomach. We agreed to take things slow. I moved back into the house, but we kept some distance between us, giving ourselves time to heal separately. Derek was attentive and patient, never pushing me, always giving me the space I needed. I could see how hard he was trying, and that meant something to me. But the memories still haunted me. Every time we were intimate, every time we shared a moment of closeness, I would feel a pang of doubt, wondering if he was thinking about her, wondering if I was just fooling myself into believing we could make this work. Over time, the intensity of my anger began to fade, replaced by a deep sadness. I mourned the loss of the marriage we once had, the trust that had been broken. I realized that I wasn't just grieving Derek's betrayal. I was grieving the life I thought we were building together. Everything had changed, and I didn't know if I would ever be able to get back to that place of security and comfort. But I also realized that maybe that wasn't the goal. Maybe the goal was to build something new, something stronger, even if it meant letting go of the past. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, we started to find a new rhythm. Derek was consistent in his efforts to rebuild my trust, and while it wasn't easy, I began to let my guard down little by little. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned if I was making the right decision, but those moments became less frequent. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this. Maybe we could come out the other side stronger than before. But even as we started to rebuild, I knew that things would never be the same. The innocence of our marriage was gone, replaced by a hard-earned understanding of what it meant to truly forgive. I didn't know if I would ever fully trust Derek again, but I was willing to try. I was willing to take that risk to see if we could create something new together. And while it was terrifying, it was also empowering. I was taking control of my life, my choices, and my future. One day, as we sat together on the porch, Derek turned to me and said, "Thank you for giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of it." His words were sincere, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe we could do this. Maybe we could rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but I was willing to try. And in that moment, I realized that trying was enough. We continued to work on our marriage, step by step. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I wanted to walk away. But I stayed. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to see if we could create something stronger, something that could withstand the storms of life. And while I didn't know what the future held, I knew that I was willing to fight for it. I was willing to fight for us, for our marriage, for the life we had built together. Looking back on everything we had been through, I realized that marriage wasn't about being perfect. It was about being willing to put in the work, even when things got hard. Derek had made a terrible mistake, but he was trying to make it right, and I was willing to give him that chance. I didn't know if we would ever fully recover from what had happened, but I knew that we were both committed to trying. And maybe that was enough. In the end, it wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about learning to live with it. Learning to forgive even when it felt impossible. Learning to trust again, even when every part of me wanted to protect myself from more pain. It wasn't easy, and it would take time, but I was starting to believe that we could get there. We could rebuild, piece by piece, and maybe, just maybe, come out stronger on the other side.